A person stands beneath the open sky of the Tibetan Plateau, breathing air that contains far less oxygen than it would near the sea. Each breath is thin. Cold moves quickly across the high ground, where mountains rise beyond wide valleys and the horizon seems almost close enough to touch. Permanent life here places unusual strain on the human body. The heart and lungs must work harder. The blood must carry oxygen through an environment that offers less of it. Yet families have lived here for generations. Part of that survival is cultural: shelter, clothing, cooperation, and knowledge of the land. Part of it is biological. Many Tibetan people carry a genetic variant that helps the body respond more effectively to life at high altitude. That inheritance appears to have entered their ancestors through contact with another branch of humanity. A population that disappeared tens of thousands of years ago. A people whose faces remain almost completely unknown. The Denisovans. They no longer exist as a distinct ancient population. No complete Denisovan skeleton has been recovered. No one knows what they called themselves, what languages they spoke, or how they understood the world around them. But fragments of their DNA remain inside certain modern populations. The strongest known Denisovan ancestry appears among Papuan-related and other Oceanian populations, while smaller traces occur in parts of Asia. These people are fully modern humans, not surviving Denisovans. Yet somewhere deep in their ancestry, their forebears met Denisovan-related humans, had children with them, and carried pieces of that inheritance forward. For years, the Denisovans seemed to be one of the smallest mysteries in human evolution. Almost everything began with a bone fragment from one cave in Siberia. Then researchers looked more closely at living DNA. The mystery expanded. The genetic traces did not point toward one simple encounter or one isolated northern population. They suggested contact in different places, perhaps with Denisovan groups that had already been separated from one another for immense stretches of time. The people given a single name may not have been one people at all. They may have formed a hidden human world scattered across ancient Asia. Some lived near the cold forests and mountains of Siberia. Others reached the thin air of the Tibetan Plateau. Still others may have lived farther south and east, in regions where heat and moisture destroyed the DNA inside their bones before modern science could identify them. They encountered Neanderthals. They encountered modern humans. And in one astonishing case, a child was born directly between those worlds. Her mother was Neanderthal. Her father was Denisovan. Even he carried evidence that his own ancestors had met Neanderthals before. The human family was not made of separate figures walking through isolated museum halls. Their landscapes overlapped. They met. They had children. Their histories entered one another and never fully separated again. But none of this was known when archaeologists uncovered the object that opened the door. It was not a skull. It was not a complete skeleton. It was not a beautifully shaped weapon or a monumental artifact. It was part of a finger bone, small enough to disappear among thousands of fragments. And inside it was a genetic sequence that did not match either of the human groups researchers expected to find. Far from the Tibetan Plateau, the Altai Mountains rise across southern Siberia, where forested slopes and cold river valleys meet beneath long winters. Above the Anui River lies Denisova Cave. Its entrance opens darkly above the valley. Beyond it, sediment has gathered in deep layers, preserving charcoal, tools, animal remains, and fragments left by humans who entered the cave across enormous stretches of time. Neanderthals used it. Denisovan-related people used it. Evidence from the wider region also connects the landscape with modern humans, although assigning particular objects to particular groups can be difficult. The cave was not the isolated home of one forgotten population. It was part of a human crossroads. From one of its ancient layers came the finger fragment of a young individual. By sight, it revealed almost nothing. It could not show the shape of a face, the height of a body, or the way its owner moved. There was no visible feature announcing that this person belonged to a lineage unknown to science. The answer was hidden inside the bone. Researchers extracted mitochondrial DNA, genetic material passed mainly through the maternal line. They expected it to resemble either Neanderthal DNA or that of an early modern human. It matched neither. The sequence had followed its own path through deep time. The difference was too great to dismiss as ordinary variation within a known population. A previously unidentified branch of the human family had emerged from a piece of bone scarcely large enough to suggest a person at all. The cave gave the lineage the name by which science now recognizes it: Denisovan. It was a modern label taken from the place of discovery, not the recovered name of a nation, tribe, or unified culture. The young individual had lived and died without leaving a known name. Tens of thousands of years later, one finger fragment made an entire population visible. But the bone created a problem. Scientists had found the genome before they had truly found the people. Ancient human groups are usually recognized first through anatomy: a skull, a jaw, a skeleton, or physical features that can be compared with other remains. The Denisovans appeared in reverse. Their DNA revealed that they existed, while their bodies remained almost completely absent. Several unusually large teeth from Denisova Cave were also connected with them. Additional fragments later provided more genetic information. But there was still no complete skull and no single confirmed face. Researchers could examine intimate genetic relationships while remaining unable to say with confidence what a Denisovan looked like when approaching the cave entrance or sitting beside a fire. The mystery was both precise and incomplete. Science could compare their genome with those of Neanderthals and modern humans. But it could not restore the expression, voice, or name of the young person whose finger had opened the door. Then another fragment changed the story. It was a small piece from a long bone, too incomplete to identify by shape alone. Protein analysis showed that it came from an ancient human. DNA then revealed something no skeleton had ever shown so directly. The bone belonged to an adolescent girl who lived roughly 90,000 years ago. Researchers gave the fragment the informal name Deni. Her mother was Neanderthal. Her father was Denisovan. This was not a faint genetic echo from contact many generations earlier. Deni was the direct child of parents from two ancient human groups often presented as separate branches. No one knows the circumstances of her life. The evidence cannot reveal how her parents met, which communities they belonged to, or how the people around her understood her ancestry. It reveals only what matters most. The meeting happened. Neanderthals and Denisovans were not merely related populations separated on a diagram. Their worlds came close enough for one young person to inherit one ancestry from each parent. Then her genome revealed another complication. Deni's Denisovan father also carried traces of Neanderthal ancestry inherited from an earlier encounter. The crossing of these populations had not begun with her parents. Somewhere in a previous generation, another Neanderthal and another Denisovan-related individual had children. Their descendants carried that history forward until part of it reached Deni. The available fossils are far too limited to show how common such families were. Yet Deni proved that the boundaries among ancient humans were real without being absolute. Populations could separate for thousands of years, develop distinct genetic histories, and meet again. The old family tree image began to look too clean. A tree divides into branches, and those branches never naturally rejoin. Human evolution was more like a system of rivers. Populations separated and moved into different environments. Across generations, their bodies and genomes changed. Then migration brought some of them together again, and genetic currents passed from one population into another. Some streams ended. Others merged. Parts of ancient lineages continued inside new ones. Denisova Cave preserved one of those meeting places. Its chambers had sheltered different human groups at different times. The surrounding region lay near routes connecting Siberia, Central Asia, and lands farther south. Still, the confirmed Denisovan remains were astonishingly limited. A finger fragment. Several teeth. Small pieces of bone. Enough DNA to reveal relationships, but not enough anatomy to reconstruct the population itself. If this were the entire story, the Denisovans might have remained a small archaic group associated with the Altai Mountains. But their genetic legacy was pointing elsewhere. The strongest known Denisovan ancestry was not found among people living closest to the Siberian cave. It appeared thousands of kilometers away, especially among populations with Papuan-related ancestry in Oceania. That created a geographic contradiction. How could a lineage identified in a cold Siberian cave leave some of its strongest genetic traces in people whose ancestors lived far to the south and east, beyond mountains, forests, coastlines, and seas? The answer could not be that one tiny population remained around Denisova Cave. The genetic record suggested a much larger history. Ancestors of modern humans moving through Asia must have encountered Denisovan-related populations somewhere along their journeys. Those meetings may have occurred more than once and may have involved Denisovan groups already separated from one another. Some of those groups may never have lived in Siberia. Their bones may be hidden in places where ancient DNA rarely survives. Some remains may already rest in collections under uncertain labels. Others may have vanished so completely that only inherited genetic fragments reveal their existence. Even the word Denisovan began to feel too simple. Science needed a name, and the cave provided one. But a label taken from a single northern site might be covering several populations spread across enormous regions and separated by time. The individual represented by the finger bone may have belonged to a northern branch. Denisovan-related groups farther south could have adapted to very different climates and landscapes. They may have differed in appearance, ancestry, and behavior, though the evidence cannot yet describe those differences precisely. The mystery was no longer one cave and one lost people. It was becoming a human mosaic. One trail led toward the high Tibetan Plateau, where survival itself demanded adaptation. Another extended across eastern and southeastern Asia. The strongest genetic signal reached toward Oceania. And somewhere along those paths, modern humans encountered Denisovan-related populations whose fossils have never been confidently identified. The cave in Siberia had not revealed the center of the Denisovan world. It had revealed the place where modern science first learned how to recognize it. Beyond the Altai Mountains, the true mystery stretched across a continent. Denisova Cave had opened the door. What stood behind it was not one forgotten population. It was the northern shadow of an entire lost human world. ##. The trail left the Altai Mountains and moved south. Beyond the cold forests of Siberia, it crossed the interior of Asia, passed through open plains and mountain corridors, then climbed toward a landscape where even breathing became difficult. The Tibetan Plateau rises beneath an immense sky. Cold winds move over bare slopes and high valleys. At elevations where the air contains far less oxygen than it does near the sea, every movement places greater strain on the body. This was not where the next Denisovan evidence was expected to appear. The lineage had been recognized through a finger bone from a Siberian cave. Yet thousands of kilometers away, near the roof of the world, another piece of the mystery was waiting. It was not a finger. It was a jaw. The Xiaha mandible is heavy and powerfully built, with large teeth still set into the bone. It came from Baishia Karst Cave, a high-altitude site on the northeastern Tibetan Plateau. The cave opens into a severe but habitable landscape of rock, grassland, cold seasons, and thin air. For ancient humans, it offered shelter in a place where survival demanded knowledge of weather, animals, stone, fire, and one another. The jaw contained no usable ancient DNA. For a time, that seemed to close the most direct path toward its identity. The method that had revealed the Denisovans in Siberia could not simply be repeated. But DNA was not the only biological record preserved inside ancient bone. Researchers examine surviving proteins, molecules that can sometimes remain long after genetic material has broken down. Those proteins connected the mandible to a Denisovan-related human population. The result changed the map. A lineage first recognized in the darkness of Denisova Cave had left physical evidence far to the southeast, high on the Tibetan Plateau. The jaw was at least around 160,000 years old. That date placed Denisovan-related humans in or near this extreme environment astonishingly early. Long before the modern populations now associated with permanent life on the plateau, another branch of the human family had already reached its thin air. The mandible cannot tell us the person's name, sex, language, or beliefs. It does not provide a complete face. It cannot reveal whether the individual was born on the plateau or arrived from elsewhere. But it establishes presence. Someone from a Denisovan-related population had lived in this highland world at a time when survival there demanded more than passing through. The Siberian finger had revealed an unknown lineage. The Tibetan jaw revealed distance. And Baishia Karst cave had more to offer. Archaeological work uncovered stone tools and animal remains associated with repeated human activity. Some bones carried marks consistent with processing, suggesting that the cave's occupants used animals from the surrounding highland environment for food and materials. Not every object can be assigned with certainty to Denisovans. Different humans may have entered the cave across different periods, and archaeology rarely preserves the identity of every hand that shaped a tool. Still, later evidence strengthened the connection. A rib fragment recovered from the cave was identified as Denisovan-related through protein evidence. It came from a much later period than the Xiaha jaw, suggesting that Denisovan-related people were connected with this region across a remarkable span of time. This did not look like one lost traveler briefly entering the cave. It suggested familiarity. People returned to this landscape, or related populations occupied it repeatedly. Their survival probably depended on a combination of shelter, fire, tools, knowledge of local animals, cooperation, and adaptation over generations. They were not superhuman. They were human enough to learn one of the most difficult environments on Earth. The high plateau now created a larger question. If Denisovan-related people lived in both the Altai Mountains and on the Tibetan Plateau, where else had they gone? The answer should have been waiting in fossils across Asia. Instead, the record became harder to read. Ancient DNA survives best in cold, stable conditions. Siberian caves can preserve genetic material in ways that warm forests, humid valleys, and tropical soils rarely do. Across much of eastern, southern, and southeastern Asia, heat and moisture destroy DNA. A fossil may remain while the genetic record needed to identify it disappears. This creates a strange imbalance. The regions most likely to have supported large and varied ancient human populations are often the same regions least likely to preserve their DNA. A Denisovan-related person could have lived far from Siberia and left behind a fossil that no laboratory could connect genetically to Denisova Cave. Many Asian fossils were also discovered before scientists knew Denisovans existed. Researchers classified them using the ancient human groups recognized at the time, comparing skulls, jaws, and teeth with known examples of Homo erectus, Neanderthals, early modern humans, and other populations. But evolution does not always produce bodies that fit cleanly into modern categories. Some Asian fossils show combinations of features that remain difficult to interpret. A few have been proposed as possible Denisovan relatives or representatives. Those identifications remain debated. Without DNA or strong protein evidence, unusual anatomy alone cannot turn a fossil into a Denisovan. Similar features can appear in different populations, and ancient interbreeding can blur otherwise useful distinctions. Still, the possibility remains. A jaw or tooth may already be resting inside an archaeological collection beneath an uncertain label, discovered long before anyone knew what genetic signature to look for. Science learned how to recognize Denisovans through their genome before it learned how to recognize all of their bodies. A Denisovan-related fossil without preserved DNA might therefore remain anonymous. The fossil record was incomplete. The genetic record created an even larger problem. It suggested that the word Denisovan might be hiding more than one population. The name came from a single cave. It created the useful impression of one group living near Siberia, meeting Neanderthals, then disappearing. But living genomes do not preserve such a simple picture. Different Denisovan-related genetic signals appear to come from populations that may have been separated from one another for immense periods. They shared deep ancestry, but that does not mean they formed one people. Imagine two populations descending from the same ancient branch. One remains in the north, moving through cold valleys and forests. Another spreads toward plateaus, warmer lowlands, or lands farther east. For hundreds of thousands of years, distance limits contact between them. Different environments shape their histories. They remain related in a deep genetic sense, yet by the time modern humans encounter their descendants, the populations may be profoundly distinct. Both can still be called Denisovan-related. But the label does not erase the distance between them. The northern people near the Altai Mountains may not have closely resembled Denisovan-related populations living farther south. High-altitude groups on the Tibetan Plateau may have carried adaptations absent elsewhere. The evidence cannot confidently reconstruct those differences. It cannot tell us whether these populations shared languages, cultures, or any sense of common identity. There was no single Denisovan nation stretching across Asia. What the evidence suggests is a mosaic. In the north, Denisovan-related people entered the Altai region and sometimes encountered Neanderthals. On the Tibetan Plateau, related humans survived in thin air across long spans of time. Farther east and south, other Denisovan-related populations may have lived where ancient DNA rarely endures. Along routes later traveled by modern humans toward Southeast Asia and Oceania, still other groups may have remained almost invisible except through the ancestry they left behind. The central revelation was becoming difficult to avoid. The word Denisovan may describe not one lost people, but several related human populations spread across ancient Asia. Some of those lineages may have separated from one another hundreds of thousands of years before their descendants met modern humans. The physical evidence is tiny. The possible range is enormous. A finger bone in Siberia. A jaw and rib on the Tibetan Plateau. Genetic traces reaching toward islands far beyond mainland Asia. Between those points lies a continent-sized darkness filled with populations whose bodies have mostly vanished. Then modern humans entered that world. They did not arrive everywhere at once. Movement took place through different routes and across many generations. Wherever they traveled, they entered landscapes that were not empty. Other humans already knew those rivers, valleys, forests, plateaus, and coastlines. In some places, modern humans may have passed without meeting Denisovan-related groups. In others, contact occurred. Some encounters produced children. The proof survives not as a written account, but as inherited DNA. This contact probably did not happen only once. It may have occurred in different regions and at different times, involving Denisovan-related populations that were themselves genetically distinct. The exact locations remain uncertain because genetic inheritance can move far from the place where it first entered a population. Descendants migrate. Populations expand. A genetic segment may travel thousands of kilometers from the original encounter. Living DNA can reveal that contact happened. It cannot always identify the cave, valley, or shoreline where two people first met. The end of the Denisovans was probably just as complicated. There may never have been one final settlement or one identifiable moment of extinction. Some Denisovan-related populations may have declined because of environmental change or isolation. Others may have faced competition for resources. Some could have moved, fragmented, or merged gradually into expanding modern human communities. Interbreeding may have absorbed parts of their ancestry into larger populations even as their distinct identities disappeared. No single explanation has been proven for every region. Their disappearance was likely uneven. One population may have vanished without descendants. Another may have contributed ancestry to modern humans before fading from the archaeological record. Another could have survived for thousands of years after related groups elsewhere were gone. From the present, these different endings look like one extinction. Up close, they may have been many separate histories. This changes the meaning of disappearance. A population can stop existing as a recognizable group while some of its ancestry continues elsewhere. Its language can fall silent. Its culture can be lost. Its name can vanish. Yet fragments of its genome may pass through descendants who belong completely to another population and another age. Inside modern genomes, researchers have found patterns pointing toward ancient groups for which no confirmed skeleton exists. Geneticists sometimes call these ghost populations. The name sounds supernatural, but the idea is precise. A ghost population is inferred from the DNA it contributed to later people, even when its own physical remains have not been confidently identified. Its settlement may be unknown. Its fossils may have decayed or remained undiscovered. But descendants carry evidence that the population once existed. The genome preserves an encounter for which archaeology has not yet found the scene. Denisovan-related ancestry contains signs of such hidden populations. Different living groups carry different Denisovan-derived genetic segments. Those segments do not all point neatly back to the genome recovered from the Siberian cave. Some appear to come from Denisovan-related populations that were deeply separated from the Altai group. This suggests multiple episodes of interbreeding. Modern humans may have encountered one Denisovan-related population in one part of Asia and another elsewhere. The name remains the same because the ancient groups shared ancestry. The histories behind that name may have been very different. Denisovan-related people left a finger bone in Siberia and a jaw on the Tibetan Plateau. Other populations may have left no confidently identified fossils at all, only genetic fragments inherited by later humans. Those genetic traces cannot restore complete lives. They do not reveal what these people called themselves, how they organized their communities, or what they thought when unfamiliar humans entered their territory. Their presence survives as a pattern rather than a portrait. This is why the Denisovan world remains both vast and nearly empty. The evidence points toward related human populations spread across enormous regions. Yet each time the story reaches for a body, it finds another fragment. The trail now returns to the Tibetan Plateau. A living person moves through high country beneath a wide, cold sky. The air entering the lungs remains thin. The body must constantly adjust to reduced oxygen. Modern Tibetan populations possess a well-known version of a genetic region called EPAS1. It is associated with the body's response to low-oxygen environments and has been connected to Denisovan-related ancestry. This does not mean one Denisovan-derived variant alone explains survival at altitude. High-altitude adaptation is complex, shaped by multiple genes, culture, environment, and generations of natural selection. But EPAS1 preserves a remarkable possibility. Ancestors of modern Tibetans may have inherited useful genetic variation from an earlier Denisovan-related population connected with Asia's high-altitude landscapes. The jaw from Xiahe showed that Denisovan-related people reached the plateau. The rib suggested that their connection to the region continued across long periods. EPAS1 points toward another kind of survival, not of culture or identity, but of inherited biology. The people living on the plateau today are fully modern humans. They are not Denisovans, and their history cannot be reduced to one ancient genetic contribution. Yet part of their ancestry may preserve the trace of contact with a population that disappeared as a distinct group long ago. The greatest surviving Denisovan archive may therefore not lie beneath a cave floor. It may not rest inside a museum drawer. It may exist as scattered fragments within living human genomes. Bones can reveal where Denisovan-related people lived. DNA can reveal whom they met. It can preserve evidence of populations whose fossils remain unnamed and of encounters that happened in places archaeology has not found. The northern cave gave science a label. The Tibetan jaw expanded the territory. The living genome now pointed toward something larger. Different Denisovan populations. Different meetings. Different pieces of inheritance carried into the present. And hidden inside those pieces was the final mystery: how much of the vanished Denisovan world had survived inside people who never knew its name. ###. The bones had almost vanished. The inheritance had not. On a modern computer screen, human genomes appear as patterns of letters and color. To most people, they reveal nothing. But when researchers compare DNA from living populations with the ancient genomes recovered from Denisovan and Neanderthal remains, certain inherited segments begin to stand apart. They resemble the Denisovan genetic record more closely than they resemble ordinary variation among modern humans. The original population is gone. Yet fragments of its ancestry remain. It is like discovering passages from a lost manuscript copied into later books. The first volume has disappeared, and most of its pages can never be recovered. But a sentence survives in one copy, part of another page in a second, and a different line somewhere far away. No living person carries a complete Denisovan genome. What survives is scattered. Small pieces entered modern human ancestry through ancient families formed when Denisovan-related people and modern humans met and had children. Geneticists call this process introgression. DNA from one population passes into another and continues through their descendants. There was nothing supernatural about it. People met. Children were born. Some of the DNA they inherited endured. But those fragments are not distributed equally across humanity. The strongest known Denisovan ancestry occurs among people with Papuan-related and other Oceanian ancestry. Estimates vary by population and method, but in some groups Denisovan-derived DNA is often described as reaching roughly 4 to 5%. Smaller contributions appear in parts of East, South, and Southeast Asia. Many other populations carry little or no clearly detected Denisovan ancestry. This does not make modern Papuan, Oceanian, Tibetan, or Asian populations surviving Denisovans. They are fully modern humans whose histories include countless ancestors, migrations, and cultural transformations. Denisovan ancestry is one ancient layer within those much larger stories. Yet that layer records something fossils could not. It records contact. The pattern is too complicated to be explained easily by one meeting with one Denisovan population. Some inherited segments resemble the genome recovered from Siberia more closely than others. Additional genetic patterns appear to point toward Denisovan-related groups that had already followed separate histories for immense spans of time. Researchers have therefore proposed multiple episodes of introgression. The exact number, timing, and locations remain debated, and different models do not always agree. But the larger picture is clear enough to change the story. Modern humans may have encountered one Denisovan-related population in one region of Asia, then met another population elsewhere, perhaps generations later. Those Denisovan groups could have shared ancient ancestry while being separated from each other for hundreds of thousands of years. They were related, but not identical. During that separation, each population developed its own genetic history. One may have lived in northern environments. Another may have occupied high plateaus. Others could have survived farther south or east, in regions where heat and moisture destroyed most ancient DNA. Some Denisovan-related ancestry in Papuan populations appears to reflect contributions from deeply divergent lineages. This means the ancient groups shared distant Denisovan ancestry but had remained apart long enough for their genomes to become noticeably different. The modern genome preserves evidence of the meetings. It does not provide a complete map. A Denisovan-derived segment found in Oceania may have entered modern human ancestry somewhere else before being carried onward by migration. Descendants moved, populations divided, and inherited DNA traveled far from the original encounter. The fossils do not show where every meeting happened. The genetic traces reveal that the meetings occurred. This is why the Denisovan mystery became much larger than the bones that opened it. Science may never recover a confidently identified skeleton from every Denisovan-related population. Some groups may remain visible only through fragments of DNA inherited by people living today. And even those fragments represent only a small part of what once existed. Across thousands of generations, Denisovan-derived DNA was broken into smaller sections and rearranged as it passed from parent to child. Much of it disappeared through chance. Some segments may have been harmful in modern human populations and were gradually removed by natural selection. Others were neutral and survived or vanished without providing a consistent advantage. A few may have been useful under particular environmental conditions. What remains today is therefore not a complete genetic portrait of Denisovans. It is a filtered inheritance. The strongest example appears once more on the Tibetan Plateau. A modern person moves through high country beneath a wide, cold sky. The air entering the lungs contains less oxygen than it would near the sea, and the body must function under conditions that place constant pressure on circulation, breathing, and energy. Among Tibetan populations, a version of the genetic region known as EPAS1 is associated with adaptation to high altitude. Evidence connects this version with Denisovan-related ancestry. EPAS1 helps regulate the body's response to low oxygen. The Denisovan-related form appears to have contributed to biological responses that became useful under the severe conditions of the plateau. But it is only one part of a much larger adaptation. No single genetic region explains how people thrive at high altitude. Survival there depends upon multiple genes, generations of natural selection, and cultural knowledge involving shelter, clothing, food, movement, and cooperation. The inherited Denisovan-related variant did not build those human systems. It became one biological contribution within them. Still, its history is extraordinary. At some point in ancient Asia, modern humans encountered a Denisovan-related population. Through their descendants, genetic variation entered modern human ancestry. Much later, in the thin air of the plateau, natural selection favored a version that helped people meet the demands of that environment. The population from which it came disappeared as a distinct group. Part of its biology remained useful in another human future. Researchers have also investigated Denisovan-derived variants connected with immunity, metabolism, and adaptation to disease or climate. Some associations remain uncertain, and their interpretation may change as larger datasets become available. A trait useful in one setting is not automatically useful everywhere. Denisovan DNA did not give modern humans superpowers. Ancient interbreeding simply created biological variation upon which chance and natural selection could act. But genetic survival has limits. DNA cannot preserve a memory, a language, a personal name, or a culture. It cannot reveal what Denisovan-related people called themselves or how they understood the landscapes around them. It cannot return the voice of the young individual whose finger bone revealed the lineage. It cannot tell us the names of the populations encountered elsewhere in Asia. The genome preserves ancestry. It does not preserve consciousness. This creates one of the deepest contrasts in the entire mystery. Science can examine Denisovan genetic differences with remarkable precision. Yet it cannot hear a single Denisovan word. Their biology entered the present. Their inner world did not. So what does extinction mean in a story like this? Denisovan-related populations appear to have disappeared as distinct ancient groups. No known community today preserves a continuous Denisovan identity, culture, or language. Their separate histories ended. But before that ending was complete, some Denisovan-related people had children with modern humans. Their descendants entered changing modern populations and carried fragments of Denisovan ancestry forward. Culturally and historically, the Denisovans disappeared. Genetically, their ending was less complete. That does not mean inherited DNA preserves an entire people. A population is more than a collection of genetic variants. When its language, knowledge, relationships, and identity vanish, something irreplaceable is lost. Yet ancestry complicates the boundary between survival and disappearance. A population can cease to exist separately while continuing as one thread inside the ancestry of another. For tens of thousands of years, that thread remained invisible. Then one small finger fragment emerged from the floor of a Siberian cave. At first, it seemed to belong to a single unknown individual in one remote place. Its genome opened a far larger human map. The finger revealed the Denisovan lineage. Deni revealed direct ancestry from a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, proving that ancient human divisions could meet within one family. The Xiaha jaw expanded the known Denisovan-related world to the Tibetan Plateau. The rib suggested a connection with that high-altitude region across a long span of time. Modern genomes revealed encounters with Denisovan-related populations whose bodies may never be confidently identified. Each discovery opened another part of the same hidden world. Not a single nation. Not one isolated cave population. A mosaic of related human groups separated across Asia, meeting Neanderthals and modern humans, adapting to different environments, and leaving different traces behind. Human evolution was not a clean procession in which one group stepped forward as another disappeared. It was a web. Populations separated. They migrated into unfamiliar lands. They changed over generations. Sometimes they met again after immense stretches of time. They had children, exchanged ancestry, merged, declined, and were absorbed into other populations. Some vanished without leaving descendants that can still be detected. Others entered the ancestry of expanding human groups before losing their separate identities. The Denisovans became one of the clearest examples of how a population can disappear historically while surviving partially through inheritance. Their DNA does not make anyone less modern. It creates no hierarchy among living people. It reveals that the modern human story was shaped by contact among branches of humanity that were never as isolated as the old diagrams made them appear. Somewhere in ancient Asia, a Denisovan-related parent had a child whose descendants entered a future neither population could imagine. That child may have carried genetic segments that disappeared after a few generations. Others traveled onward. One may eventually have contributed to survival in the thin air of the Tibetan Plateau. There was no plan guiding which fragments endured. Chance, migration, family, environment, and natural selection carried them forward. The Denisovans themselves faded from view. Their fossils became rare fragments beneath cave floors. Their faces remained uncertain. Their names and cultures vanished. But when researchers examined living genomes, the missing population was not entirely absent. Scattered passages remained. Not enough to reconstruct their lost world. Enough to prove that it had touched ours. The finger bone still rests at the beginning of the mystery, physically small and almost anonymous. Inside it was the evidence of an ancient lineage. Beyond it stood a human world far more crowded and connected than anyone had expected. Perhaps the Denisovans did disappear. But extinction, in the human story, does not always mean leaving nothing alive behind.